Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are getting back into our video series on King Thor, and I am very excited about this. I love the first issue, right? The return of Gorr. It took everything, every ounce of strength I had, not to just like clickbait the title and just be like, the return of Gorr. Like it was everything I could do not to do that. We're not gonna spoil, the fact that Gorr returns, but now we're in the thick of it. And we get to see Gorr face off against King Thor and Old Man Loki. And this is amazing because here's the funny thing about this. As soon as Gorr shows up, Thor freaks. Now, for those of you guys who saw our videos or read the story, Thor God of Thunder by Jason Aaron, right? The initial run of the initial story with his run on Thor, it makes sense because Gorr the God Butcher was no small villain, right? Like this guy was hardcore. This guy was intense. And it took Thor from 3 different eras to defeat him, all of them working together to win. And then ultimately ended up taking modern day Thor with the all black necro sword of Null the symbiote god, wielding 2 hammers to basically win. Like it was insane, right? It was no small thing to beat this guy. So to see that he's back really begins to send Thor into a frenzy because now it's just kind of like, okay, what in the heck do we do next? Now, here's the cool thing about Gorr. This is one of the things that I love the most about Gorr, and I think it's one of the things that most people love the most about the way that Gorr is written. Gorr was not your villain of the week. Gorr was dynamic. It was basically this guy where it was like he had a family and he lived in a really harsh world, and like his tribe would pray to the gods and the gods would never answer. And so ultimately he turned his back on the gods. He was exiled from his tribe because of that. And ultimately, of course, he lost his wife and child, which is why he turned his back on them in the first place. And then in turn, like 2 gods fell from the sky and he realized that the gods were real, but the gods had basically been ignoring them. So he went on this campaign across the entirety of the universe to kill every god he found. And it was cool to see because when you took that, it made it very human insofar as those of us who are in situations where it's like, why can't I just get 1 ounce of help from someone somewhere? I don't even care what it is. It's just, will someone out there help me, right? Like we've all been in that desperate situation that comes from a variety of different circumstances. And so as a result of that, Gorr was kind of like that frustration that we have with our life given form in comic book, and we loved it. Here's the thing, and I wanna know what your all stance is about. I wanna know what your all stance is on this. Gorr the God Butcher. I think he's the best Thor villain there's ever been. If I'm being honest with you guys, I think Gorr the God Butcher is the best Thor villain ever made, right? Because he taunts Thor here. Like Thor's like, I thought you were dead. And Gorr's like, wasn't I though? I guess I really was. But your brother Loki brought me back when he brought back the all black necro sword. I came with it. I've been in that sword the entire time. Now, on the surface, it'd be easy to kind of look at that and say, okay, so this is basically just Jason Aaron pulling Gorr out of his backside because, whatever reason. No. Remember, Gorr had used the all black necro sword for ages, for eons and eons and eons. Like he existed thousands of years ago and has existed this entire time, running all the way up into the future, right? I mean, he'd existed really almost to the end of time. Not really quite to that point, but pretty close to that point. And so you're talking about a guy who's wielded a weapon, really like a magical artifact for thousands of years. Now, in truth, the all black necro sword was originally created by Null the symbiote god, but Gorr the God Butcher got his hands on it and learned all the properties of it. And so kind of bonding himself to the all black, he was quite literally able to store himself within the sword so that when the time came when the sword was brought back, he'd be able to return as well. But the funny thing is that the statement made by Loki is, here, like take this artifact, take this piece of the all black and finish your work. And that's when Thor believes he begins to pick up on what's going on. That more or less the summoning, the resurrection of Gorr, of course, did come by Loki, but it was believed, or at least Thor believes that Loki did this because Gorr would be able to kill Thor. That ultimately Thor believed that Loki wouldn't be able to do it on his own, right? It's the one thing he wouldn't be able to do. No matter what he says, no matter what he's done, it's always like, one day I'm gonna kill Thor. But when the time comes, he wouldn't actually be able to do it. And so summoning Gorr would be the means by which that could be done. More so than that, and this is something to understand here, Loki has never met Gorr. And so because of that, Loki doesn't really know what Gorr is about. In the mind of Loki, it's, hey, I summoned you here to do a job, get to it, man. And the response of Thor is no. Gorr's job is to like kill gods everywhere he finds them, right? You are a god, Loki. He's going to kill you. And that's exactly what happens. Literally, Gorr just strings them both up and basically says like, I'm gonna kill both of you now. And it's kind of a cool thing because again, he spends the whole time taunting Thor. And that's what made Gorr so awesome. The fact that he would taunt Thor. It wasn't enough to say like, I'm more powerful than you, so I'm going to kill you. It had to be one of these things of, you believe you're special because you're a god, but ultimately you're not. Let me show you how unspecial you are. And it's one of these cool things because what he says is like, let's see what's inside. Like, let's see what kind of person you are on the inside. And of course, Thor basically uses the Thor force to blast Gorr into the atmosphere, right? Like to blast him into orbit. But what that does is it leads to Thor trying to talk to Loki. And Loki really kind of seems to be at the point now where it's just like, whatever, man, like none of this really matters, right? I mean, Thor summons his hammer. He basically brings Mjolnir in, which is kind of the battle, everything beginning to ramp up. And that's what he basically says, fine, if you're not going to be a part of this conflict, if you're not going to help me defeat Gorr, then like, I'll do it on my own. Now understand this. And this is a very important thing to understand, that while Jason Aaron depicts Thor in this way, while Thor is in this mode where it looks like he's got it under control and he's contained, on the inside, he's panicking, right? Because it's Gorr. It's Gorr the God Butcher. And so not only does Thor summon Mjolnir to his side, he also summons the Odin sword. Now, of course, the Odin sword is a wildly powerful artifact, and it debuted back in Journey into Mystery issue number 117. Its origin is kind of murky, but the overall gist of this sword is that when it's drawn, that basically all things would start to come to an end, right? Between the power it possesses, the purpose for its wielding, what this means is this is an act of desperation. Thor grabbing this sword is basically a scenario whereby it's kind of like it's all or nothing. And it does kind of make sense because it's a battle for the ages, right? It's a battle kind of near the end of time is really what this whole conflict is, the death of the gods, so on and so forth. And so with that being the case, what you also end up learning is that while the all-black Necro Sword was the primary weapon of Gorr the God Butcher, that in his time, in his exile, more or less his isolation, what he's also been doing is fashioning his own weapon, which is called the Annihilablade. It's basically the planet cleaver. It's insane. It's this massively colossal sword. It's probably the biggest weapon that I think I've ever seen. It's bonkers how huge it is. And this thing lives up to its reputation. This sword is powerful enough, as it's shown here, it's powerful enough to plunge through a planet and destroy it, right? So like, it's a pretty significant thing. Something else to notice here is that during this fight, with the planet cleaver being wielded by Gorr and with the Odin sword and Mjolnir being wielded by Thor, notice the way in which Gorr talks. This is something that kind of caught me off guard, right? What he says here are things like, I'm going to annihilate whatever gods are left. If there are any left, of course, I'm going to kill them, but then I'm also going to refashion and recreate everything. Like whatever humans are left on Earth, I'm going to wipe them all out and I'm going to create life anew. It almost seems kind of out of character for Gorr, right? Because when you look at Gorr in terms of the context of Thor, the God of Thunder storyline, for the most part, it was only one facet. It was really like one sequence of events that was going on with Gorr. It was a singular act. It was Gorr's a guy who hates gods. Gorr has been killing gods. Gorr devised this scheme to basically create a bomb that could wipe out all gods across the timeline. Like that was it. It was the one plan that Gorr had at the time. But the reality was, despite all the cool things that we saw about him, we didn't really get a full-on depiction of everything that made Gorr who he was. And so where it does kind of seem to come out of left field of, well, Jason Aaron's making him this guy where he just wants to destroy the universe and recreate it and so on and so forth. And it seems very cliche. That's not really the case. The funny thing about this is this falls perfectly in line with the machinations and the motivations of Gorr. Gorr despises gods. Gorr wants to get rid of gods. When Gorr looks at various beings out there who pray to gods, he basically says they do that because they don't know any better. Any being out there that lives their whole life without ever having learned to hate a god simply just didn't live long enough. The gods hadn't betrayed them at that point, but given enough time, they would. It's the nature of gods. It's what they do. And so because Gorr maintained that ideology in his mind, looking at the various denizens on Earth, those individuals who have basically kind of been brought back, or at least, you know, Earth kind of thriving the way it is since the end of Thor, God of Thunder, when All-Father Thor had kind of brought back life on Earth. When he looks at that and says like, all these beings are praying to Thor, it's because they don't know any better. So I will wipe them clean. I will basically sterilize this planet, and I will lead the universe into a place whereby it doesn't believe in gods, where there's no reason to believe in a god at all because all they do is betray things. And this is where Loki makes his move, right? Where Loki's been strung up to this point, and the various denizens really kind of show up here and then ultimately end up freeing him. This is one of the coolest moments because where you have Gorr the God Butcher going on these grandiose speeches, gods are bad, I'm going to destroy gods, I'm the God Butcher, so on and so forth. Loki shows up and it's just kind of like, you amuse me, right? Like I was butchering gods long before you were ever born, right? Like I am the original God Butcher. So when you come here and you start talking about the fact that you're the God Butcher and you're going to start doing these things, so on and so forth, understand you're a half measure in comparison to me. And this is where Loki's like misunderstanding of the situation comes into play, because as epic as it is, Loki has never met Gorr. Like he's never met this guy before. He doesn't understand what he's getting into. Right off the bat, Gorr helps Loki understand his place in the bigger picture when he slices his arm off. After that, he in turn blinds him. Like he basically like takes his eyes out. And it's like, Loki, like you've seen so much, but at the end of the day, you're never gonna see anything else. Like in the span of seconds, the tide is turned. And this is the kind of power that you're talking about here when it comes to Gorr. Because even Loki, despite the fact that he's not really Asgardian, that he's essentially Frost Giant, he's still a force to be reckoned with. Understand understand that. Like Loki against most superheroes on Earth, like 99% of the superheroes on Earth, it's no contest. And because of all this power he possesses, when someone like Gorr comes along and takes him out that fast, that says something. It says something about the kind of power that Gorr has. And it's one of the reasons why we loved the original God of Thunder so much, because it was just this guy who showed up seemingly out of nowhere and wrecked these guys. And so what you end up getting is Thor really trying to reach out to Loki and say like, come on, like you have to help me out here. The way this whole thing played out is that yes, Loki did summon Gorr, that's true. But the idea behind this was that Loki wouldn't be able to take himself out, that Loki really wanted to eliminate Thor and then basically die himself, but Loki wouldn't be able to have taken himself out in that way. And so the idea was to summon Gorr to bring him here so that Gorr would kill Thor and then kill Loki and then kind of go forward from there. But Loki miscalculated in the extreme because Gorr is not like anybody he's ever met before. And so as a result of that, you basically have Loki who in these last moments really sort of begins to kind of focus on what it was that Thor had told him, right? That like their mother Frigga kind of been like, she was disappointed in you. She was totally let down by you. You were a failure in every conceivable way, where Thor had basically lied about that in order to kind of demoralize Loki so he could essentially defeat him. That he comes out with the truth and says, I've been lying as well. Our mother loved you. Our mother loved you more than anything. And her dying words to me were, do not let your brother go. And that's why Thor has been holding on to Loki for so long, right? It's why he doesn't let Loki die. It's why he doesn't work alongside Gorr to kill Loki or something like that. Or why he hasn't killed Loki himself is because he knows Loki was loved by his mother. And at the end of the day, despite Loki's machinations and schemes, he's the brother of Thor. And so what you end up getting is in these final moments here, when they're consumed by the All Black, you have Thor reaching out for Loki and you have Loki who seems to reach out for Thor. And before we find out what happens, the story ends. Man, this is fantastic. Like I absolutely adore this story. I love Jason Aaron's work, right? Like Jason Aaron has the best run on Thor that I think there's ever been. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Peace.